On the shelter metrics.
All right. Make sure I can share my screen. We're using some new technology to record our meetings. This little owl is listening to all of us, but I want to make sure it's sharing properly. There we go.
Good to know.
All right, I am Jennifer Rainey, assistant to the city manager, filling in for Sarah since we no longer have Sarah on our team, stepping into the animal shelter manager position in the interim just until we fill that position. So Sarah did a wonderful service for us and provided most of these slides. So she was able to combine all of this, compile all of the information. So most of it should look familiar. I looked back in our previous presentations and we were using very similar metrics. So some of our shelter numbers from October of 23 through February of 24, our total intake, that includes our wild and domestic, doesn't include deceased animals, was at 602 this past year, and the previous year in comparison was 682, so just under that. It was a little slower winter. With our outcomes, our previous year, that same time frame was at 712, and we were at 625 this time. That includes those adoptions, those transfers, return to owners. And adoption, a previous year was at 237. We were a little lower this year as well, just kind of overall a little lower in intake, so a little lower in all of those outcomes as well. So 189. And then our RTO was actually almost identical from last year's same time frame. We're at 88 the previous year, and this year the return to owners is at 87. And continued numbers are clinic numbers. So we had 174 animals that were spayed and neutered after adoption, as well as the trap neuter release program. We have 42 animals that were transferred to other agencies for adoption. And then our wildlife release number was 38 that were trapped and then released back into the wild, kind of self-explanatory there. And deceased pickup, 133 that were filed through the FBTX or the C-Click Fix app that can be filed online. They can file on the app, or they can call our through to some of our different lines, and then they'll file that for the residents through that. Hey, welcome.
Diane. I didn't make it.
Just fine. We're just going over our animal services metrics. We've got agendas in that back right corner for you too. For our field calls, we had just over 1,000 field calls over the same time period. We had 4,400 phone calls, so that's all calls incoming and outgoing to animal services lines. And then through our app, all animal services related issues that were submitted. So those are staff are responding to those, going out and investigating cases if it's a case, going out to retrieve the animal. And then finally, the at-large animal calls. So the number of calls received about loose animals was at 119 through this time period.
That seems low compared to what I see on Nextdoor, but
yes.
a lot of them just probably don't get called into you guys.
I know this is something that Sarah was very, very, very proud of, and I know our staff are really appreciative of, is the renovations that were completed to allow them to each have their own workstation in that back office area. And then this new little break room area. This break room is nice. It's got a dining room. We don't have many of those dining room areas, a dining table area, sofa. They've got the fridge, microwave, and a nice little kitchen setup. And then we have a lovely story about Nico that I would love for Bailey. You feel comfortable sharing about Nico? I think that this shares.
So I think Sarah likes to include pictures of the animals sometimes, and then Nico ended up having an interesting story. He came into the shelter as a stray, or no, he was surrendered. So he was surrendered by residents. There were apparently 2 families living in a complex together. One family moved out and abandoned Nico with the family that remained. So they ended up surrendering on behalf of them because they abandoned their dog. Come to find out that wasn't the actual story. So they had been kicked out and didn't have anywhere to live. So they asked them, can you hang on to the dog till we find somewhere that will house a dog? In that time frame, they surrendered on behalf of the other family. Nico was with us for maybe 3 weeks, almost a month on the adoption floor waiting for a new family, and then the actual owners ended up coming back and they were like, that's our dog. They ended up reaching out to the family that was supposed to be hanging on to him, and I guess they told him that they brought him up there. So Nico was returned to the owners he's been with. He recognized them. It's a great story. And then we just wanted to say that microchipping is a big deal. So like a lot of residents that have been here a long time, when microchipping wasn't a thing, we used to register our animals with the city that you lived in. So now it's kind of transitioned over to microchipping. And if Nico had been microchipped and registered to the actual family, we would have been able to reunite them a lot sooner. He wouldn't have had to stay in the shelter for about a month. He wouldn't have had taken up capacity that could have gone to other animals that didn't already have a family. So microchipping is important. It's how we register animals now instead of just registering through the city. That microchip will have the family's contact information on it. So the second they come in, all we have to do is call them and he could go home pretty much immediately as long as they give us a call back and say they want him.
He was a big fluffy bear in the shelter and he was always so happy and so sweet and jumping around. You could tell he was,
Yeah, he knew them.
he was waiting.
Well, I'm glad, because I was mulling over his kennel one day, like, he's too big, I can't handle him. So I'm very glad to hear that story.
Yes, a good story.
Tearful reunion, but a positive reunion. He's able to get back with his family, and if he were microchipped, it would have been a lot faster.
Right.
That's it on our side. Are there any questions?
So I heard you say that it did not allow for another dog to have that kennel space because he had been there so long. You have 16 kennels right now.
So it depends on what you're talking about. We have 10 adoption kennels. And then we have 8 hold kennels, 4 isolation kennels, and 3 rabies kennels. So in terms of adoption, we really want to keep hold ISO empty because that's for dogs that are coming in every single day. So realistically, you need to think about the 10 number, because if they're not in those first 10 kennels, people aren't going to see them. They can't see them in the back unless they're looking at our online website for the animals that are available. But yes, we do have more than 10 ideally, but that's for hold and isolation and rabies. So we legally cannot put anything other than rabies quarantine dogs in rabies kennels. And then isolation has its purpose for dogs that are either sick and can't go with the rest of the dog population in the shelter. And then hold is for anything coming in. So we can keep adoption dogs in there on occasion, especially if we're full, but the public can't see them. That area is restricted to employees only.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I've been back there and when a dog had puppies.
Yeah.
And I think they all died except for one.
Oh.
Because they all got trapped in that
The drain?
drain. Yeah,
Yeah, I don't recall when that happened, daughter.
that was a long time.
That was probably
About 10
even
years ago.
before, yeah, before my time.
Yeah, so all the dog hallways do have that drain, but
I think she's talking about the bed. Underneath it.
yeah, the drain in the back of the kennels, yeah. All the kennels do have that drain.
Any questions?
No, and Valerie, no, and one more. The deceased pickup, I guess, were those a lot of the dogs that were hit by cars or animals that were run over?
Luckily, everything in C-CLIP that's submitted is gonna be deceased wildlife. If it's something domestic, like a cat or dog, that's actually still put into the pet point system because we need to document them. And whenever it is a domestic animal, we like to hold on to them for at least a week. For an owner to come forward at that point in case they are missing their pet, and they can decide to either have it cremated or we'll take care of it.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is discussing the possibility of a shelter expansion project. And take appropriate action.
See everything.
Okay.
There's no presentation for this next item, so Just minimize that so you don't have to. There we go. So this is just a discussion. I apologize. It adjusts to look at you, whoever's making noise. So that's our little owl here. But this item is just a discussion item. There's no presentation on it, just that after the update of the most recent numbers.
So there's no information being shared. What state are we in about talking about expansion?
I think that it can be discussed. I know they have recently done the renovations of that office area, the officing area, and then our break room area. But I know there's been discussions in the past, from my understanding, there's been discussions in the past. There were plans in the past that were maybe drafted of previous expansion items. Based off of my discussions with Sarah, her feelings were that we weren't at a place to expand just yet. We've only had, I believe it was about a 3.9% or 3.6% increase in intakes and outcomes in the past 5 years. So it's just not growing at a large enough rate.
Right now.
Right now, yes. But understanding new apartments, new residences that are coming on board, that's definitely something that we'd want to take into consideration as the city expands.
And I understand that the city would get together, city staff, and maybe work with an architect to see for the future what something might look like, or satellite office, or, shelter.
Yes.
Would look like. So is that being discussed? I mean, because I'm just talking about long-term, because it looks like this might take years.
To continue that progress?
Yeah, and is it being discussed at the city council level or internally?
That's something I can look into.
No. I'll answer the question. It has not been. What are your needs? Let's start with that. What are the needs? If we're not ready for an expansion per Sarah, then what are the needs? Because that would be a better driver than just throwing something at the wall and seeing what sticks.
Well, let me ask you, you mentioned at the December meeting, because I had said the initial plans we had years ago, they could not add a second floor to the existing shelter. And didn't you say something about that? They've looked into that far and determined that they can't.
Well, there was some money that was donated. And so we were looking at not going up. We had agreed that the foundation isn't the issue. And I've asked engineers about this, when you lay the foundation, it's not about whether it will support 1 or 2 floors. It's really about the height restrictions and other things. And then an elevator, because that would be required. And then you have space for an elevator. But when I had toured with Ben, all of facilities, he was thinking of taking that back drive between the shelter and the Brookhaven area, because it's a flood zone. So we could still put animals, like shift where the animals play now to behind it and expand a little bit, like the cat area type of thing. So that was an option thrown out there that had been discussed just amongst city staff, thought processes of how to make it work when we're ready. But that space, again, I go back to needs versus wants. What do we need if we're not in a moment that we have to or can expand? So I think that would come back to staff. What is the need?
When you guys say that the intake hasn't gone up, is it because you're limiting surrenders? Or can someone just walk in and drop an animal?
So we don't limit surrenders, we have them by wait list, so it should limit it to immediate surrenders kind of thing. We for the most part have a 2-week surrender wait list. Of course, that doesn't take care of people that want to bypass the wait list. In that case, they're obligated to surrender for euthanasia, so that possibly it doesn't impact our numbers to be housing animals that are surrendered when they don't want to wait. So they have the option to wait 2 weeks. We don't ever tell them no. So they have the wait list or they can surrender for euthanasia.
And that's
Is it being
typically,
euthanized when that happens?
no, they typically, I wanna say a good 60 to 70% of the time, they're deterred from surrendering that day and they're willing to wait.
But
Very
then you're
rarely-
talking about 30% that is not willing to wait.
Right.
Yes,
And so what are the
that's a
euthanasia?
need.
I would say that my question is just rooted in like, the intake didn't look like it went up, but if you're deferring intake, but you had the capability, then you actually would have been able to take them. So it's kind of like a balance between what's the community's needs, how are you able to divert intake? Was that a positive situation? And then could you have taken the animal in? And in that case, you do need a kennel for that animal.
Yes,
So it's kind of like a full circle, and I don't think necessarily that your euthanasia numbers necessarily went up. I'm just pondering the question, like, were there people in need, but you couldn't help them?
Gotcha. So we do tend to ask people why they're surrendering, and we do have a lot of donations in the back. We try to offer that or the Dallas Pass program as an alternative option. That also deters them as well, but a lot of people do not call ahead of time, so they don't know the fact that we go by scheduled appointments only. So a lot of the time they're already like stuck in that position where they're like, I'm moving or I have nowhere to live and I need to drop my dog off now. But in regards to doing it as an owner surrender euthanasia, it is a bit iffy, but in my opinion, it kind of is working to get people to comply and actually wait. Because nobody wants to surrender their pet for that outcome, of course.
And in that interim, those 2 weeks from what Sarah was explaining, correct me if I'm wrong, is a lot of times they're finding different options, whether it's a family member or friend that's able to take the dog, so they may set that appointment and we're still that last resort option for them where they're finding somebody else that can take their dogs or. Yeah.
I would be somewhat cautious with that because people are going to other shelters and saying they found the dogs as strays. And I'm not saying that I have Farmers Branch residents doing that, but I have residents from other cities.
Absolutely.
And then we trace back the path of the animal and find out it's their animal. So it's sort of, it's just shifting the
yes.
Who it's falling on.
need onto someone else, and then the dog or kitty cat sits there as a stray and no one's ever coming. So I've just seen it like being more increasingly lately as more places, we have owner surrender appointments too. So I could be doing it to some other city and not
Right.
know. But I think just in this current climate that situation is happening more and that they're probably not being as successful. They're not being forthcoming, but they're also not being as successful in finding another method because we're all inundated. Rescues are inundated. So, you know, like when you look online, if you post your own pet, there's so many more. And so now people are willing to go to the extent of being like, well, at least I took it to a shelter, but I didn't say it was mine kind of thing. And then we just have more to work.
So I think the issue that comes with considering adding kennels to increase capacity is that we add the kennels, so maybe we could lessen the surrender wait list, which you would think would be solving the problem of it falling onto another shelter or rescue. But then we're gonna hit capacity when we do that eventually as well. So like, what would be recommended for the extent of expansion? If we say, let's add 5 to 10 kennels, so we can take down our wait list a week, well, now we're just gonna get full with an even greater number of animals.
I don't say it like, my solution wouldn't be like to add kennels, it would be a different option, because I also don't have unlimited kennels, and adding kennels wouldn't do me any better, but, I mean, like, the housing that you have is single-sided housing, right? So single-sided housing isn't even really recommended, especially if the dog's gonna be there probably for more than 3 to 4 days for dogs or cats. So the housing that we have isn't necessarily up to best practices by the Association of Shelter Veterinarians, who recommend that the dogs and the cats have a sleeping area and an eating area that is separate from like their litter box or the side that they possibly have to use the bathroom on.
So
So
we're
when you
talking about kennels that open up to outdoors,
I
essentially.
I mean, you can do outdoor or you can do indoor. I didn't choose indoor, outdoor because most of the shelters that have them close them down at night and then when the dog needs them,
So
they're
it's not,
gone.
yeah.
So we chose indoor, especially in this climate, because it's mostly really hot or it can be really cold and wet.
Right.
And so we chose to do that, but there are shelters that have indoor, outdoor, and that's a good combination too. So when I would think about it, I would think about what is the best housing, and if that is an expansion just to have the same, I don't wanna say the same capacity, but a better capacity. And I don't wanna misspeak, but the last time I came through, are there kennels in the halls for like cats? Yeah, so there's like, that's not really like something that I would think should be the best practice because it's in a hallway and so the air control isn't the best. It's not meant to like filter out the germs. And then you also have, they're in an open hallway. So how far can they run before they come across a dog or they get out of the door or something like that? And so your shelter honestly is way better than my old shelter. So I don't mean to sound like I'm picking it apart, but I'm just like pointing out things that would be, like, I literally had one cat room and all the cats, whether they were sick or not, were in there and all the dogs were in there in the dog room. But these would be the things that I would be looking at is like improving the housing, making sure the ventilation is right, making sure that they have double-sided housing. I'm pretty sure there's been guinea pigs, like just in not inappropriate housing, but like in the lobby. And so you might consider if guinea pigs and rabbits and hamsters are things that you get, you might dedicate 60 square feet to them and it might be a small room with a door or something like that. Because it'll help with your housing, but it also increases like them not sitting on someone's desk or like their visibility. So when I'm not by no means like an architect or a needs assessment person, but from someone who's been through that, those are some of the things that I would like consider. And like the materials that you have, if the drains have been a problem, then you might consider, I mean, those are harder, but different drain types. If the drains were a safety issue, if they're not using certain mechanical pieces of the kennels that are just breaking down on you all the time, like going simplified. I don't know if you have the little spinners for the food, how many of them are working? Like that, you know, considering that kind of thing. And if you have like, do you have the hard covers that go over the drains that are supposed to be like a bed?
Yes,
So like, how many dogs lay on those drains?
so every dog kennel has that.
But do they actually lay on it,
Lay on it, I mean,
like as it's meant to be?
it would be hard to give you an exact number. Probably not all of them all at once.
I'm just wondering because I noticed that it's like a harder surface and so they don't tend to want to lay on that. And I think, do you have I think you have Cranda beds, right? Do you have Cranda beds on top of them or no? Oh, the Cranda beds are like the elevated beds that have
No, we
like a
don't.
hammock type thing.
No.
So I just opted for those instead of the,
So like
The
your
hard-
drains are they like the circular ones that are in the floor, or how does your drain?
no, we have like, it's called a trench drain.
Yeah, I think that's.
So, some of the older ones are really deep and the covers aren't, always secured.
Mhm.
So depending on what cover you get and how deep it is what dictates whether a dog can, you know.
Okay, well, our drain is the trench, and then what comes with the kennel that you mentioned first, the bed that goes up and down is the only thing that's covered.
That's covering it.
Yeah, and then if we switch to just the beds you mentioned that are elevated, it would essentially be sitting on top of the
Yeah.
part that opens up and down, and if we took that out, then there's absolutely nothing covering the trench.
Right, so we have, like stainless steel.
Yeah.
Covers that go on them, and so essentially, if you didn't have that bed anymore, those would be like potentially.
I don't know how costly that would be. I wouldn't be opposed to something like that because I know we do have a drain issue where things are getting past the beds that are already in there, like toys, feces, shredded blankets, food. And so we are frequently having to stick our hands elbows deep up in drains to clean them out. Or
That sounds like the first need, that.
Do you
Yeah.
have like an interceptor that, it's on the outside usually covered by a manhole?
so we have one in the ground,
Yeah.
but then from the wall that the trench is on to the interceptor in the ground, there's a drain that goes under the ground into that. So there would technically need to be another interceptor in the trench before it enters the pipe that goes to the manhole. Because things are getting stuck in this like palm-sized pipe from the trench to the manhole.
Okay,
So a screen,
Some sort of screen,
mesh, you know, not
grate,
dense, but yeah.
grate.
And then, a stainless steel cover, so that's the easiest to wash down and
Yeah.
clean.
And then we would have to discuss like removing the bed or keeping the bed, because then you'd have to move that up to be able to efficiently clean the stainless steel, whereas nothing's covering their stainless steel part.
I have worked for a shelter that did not have those liftable beds and the ones you were talking about instead. I think that is a good alternative because they do have more room. The only thing would be they need to be more focused on cleaning the sound point of literally.
Yeah, so the issue with replacing the beds would be how often we have to purchase them because of them getting damaged and then cleaning. So essentially when we clean in the morning, everything in the kennel's removed and then everything's sanitized because the bed that is in there now is a part of the kennel.
And so
and
it fits in it.
and it's not a porous type of material. So if we switch beds to the elevated ones that are like a really rough mesh kind of,
Yeah, those are good.
we would have to think of a whole new way to clean, and that would probably add time to cleaning before we open at 11, so that would be a whole process.
so we clean them in the kennels while the dogs, are still occupying that kennel, not the dog, it's the dog's not in that kennel, as
Right.
long as the dog owns that kennel.
Right.
We're scrubbing, it's like you could scrub it as part of the kennel,
Okay,
like we spray it with rescue.
okay,
And we have the aluminum frame ones, so they've lasted, the sets that I have are probably 2.5 years old. But when we clean the kennel, when the dog is going to move to another kennel or leaves the shelter, then it goes to the Sally Port with like the crates and the catch poles and the nets and things
Okay.
that get sanitized there. But on a daily basis, you just
soak it and scrub it.
spray it and,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, that's not too much of an issue, that's,
It's kind of like almost a marine boat style like
yeah,
fabric.
it
but I
doesn't
don't-
absorb the water.
Yeah,
Yeah, gotcha, okay.
The dogs should be
and
clean.
you can get people to donate you the Coranda beds because you can ask. So Coranda has a donation program where they give you a link and your followers can buy the Coranda beds that you want. Like you add them to your cart
Yeah.
and then they buy them for you in the quantity that you want and they get free shipping. But they also have a shelter discount program, so you can purchase them for yourself, like with donation money, at a discount. So either your followers do it with free shipping or you do it at a discount with donation money.
So we would like to add that to our vendor list essentially. And then we do have a lot of people that ask us specifically what we require for donations. In the past, we've been just accepting anything and everything because we can filter it as needed and then also donate it to adopters and people in need. If that's something we plan to take on and like redo the way we set up our kennels with them, we could just direct all people that ask to do the donation side.
Because we do have the citizens that are willing to donate stuff like that for sure. And I do like that idea because those beds do take up a lot of room and, you know, it varies dog to dog, but a lot of the times they are hanging out on the floor.
I just think, like I've noticed at a lot of different shelters that I've toured that have them, it's kind of like as hard as the kennel floor, and so then they don't wanna lay on it. The Coranda has like some give, and then we also give them like a blanket or something. So they seem to like just, you know, like appreciate it more, unless they're one of those funny ones that likes to sploot out on.
Yeah.
Can you
But-
spell the Corindia?
Coranda, Kuranda.
Thank you. I'm sorry, you were gonna say something.
And there are ways to make your current kennels double-sided, but it wouldn't, do you have, remind me, do you have cinder block?
We do.
So they would have to like, if you wanted it to be side by side, someone could do that, but it's kind of like technically, then you'd only have 5 adoption kennels,
Exactly,
or you'd have
so-
all the guillotines closed and have 10 again, and it wouldn't be double-sided anymore. So that's where you kind of run into a problem where you might benefit from some more, I like your pod sizes, your room sizes. You don't want to get like too big, like 10 is probably enough, because if you have an outbreak or if you have really loud dogs, then it's too much. So if you stick to smaller pod and you have, your double-sided housing, there's a little bit more room for the dogs. You have a few more rooms, but they're just not as in quantity. And the cat kennels can be modified too, depending on like what types of kennels you have. You can cut portal holes in them and add the little things, but that still is the problem of if you only have enough kennels for the number of animals that you have, then instituting double housing is gonna take up more kennel space and more square footage, so that can be harder.
I would definitely say if we somehow went to double kennels, we would be severely under the number of kennels that we need for the capacity we take on now, our current use. Yeah. And then
Yeah, I just have basic questions, okay? So does the term kennel refer to housing for one animal or is it multiple sections?
we're talking about one animal right now.
So you can house total of like 25 animals at a time, right?
So we have the
You said 10, 8, 4,
You
and
have
3.
about 20 dogs.
And
8, 4, and 3. Yeah.
so it's a combination of dogs and cats?
Yes, we do. So it depends on what we have at the moment. We do take pocket pets like guinea pigs, rabbits, parrots, that kind of stuff. At the moment, we don't have any, but there's almost always cats and dogs.
So those 10 kennels are they separated? Dogs?
From the other
cats, or-
Species, yes, yeah, they can be housed in the same room. So essentially, the shelter, we have cat rooms where the cats are allowed to free roam in the adoption area. And then in a separate hallway, locked off by doors, are the 10 dog kennels. Backed up to that is a different hallway with different doors to the 8 hold kennels. And then the same thing for the isolation of rabies. It's a separate hallway. They're closed off on both ends for the dogs. And then stray intake for cats and isolation is what she's mentioning. Some of them are just in cages in a hallway. We do have 2 rooms that have closed off doors that are kind of specified. So one of them is for TNR intake, and then the other one is for isolation. So only one set of kennels is technically in an open hallway that's not blocked off by doors.
Is the room they were doing in the garage functioning?
It is, but speaking personally, really think it didn't hit the mark on what we need. We were adding it as a quarantine for cats, so we have the dog quarantine, and then we didn't necessarily have it specified, or we did have cat quarantine, which is now domestic, right?
Yeah, so we had that cat quarantine room. I'm sure you've seen the back, but the room on the right was cat quarantine. Sarah made that move because we rarely get cat quarantines. But just due to our population in the past year or two, like if we get a cat quarantine, that room is usually empty and we just use it anyway.
Yeah, so the addition we added in the garage was for quarantining cats. But it's become an issue of how to properly house them in there, and if there were multiples that needed to be quarantined. I don't know how to describe it properly, but it's another set of cat cages. It's 4 cages, 2 on top, 2 on bottom, or there's 6, but the 2 don't have doors on the bottom. So there's 4 operating kennels that are inside this very small room in the garage. So it wouldn't be allowing proper space to the cats that are being quarantined, especially if they're adult cats. And And then if we were to take the cages out and use the room independently, those cats are in there for quarantine, so there can't be multiple if we're gonna use the entire room. And I wouldn't even say it's a 10-foot room.
Can you
10 by
close
10?
the door when you clean it?
You
Is that the
can,
one
but
with
you're
double
like
doors?
smushed against that cage.
It's.
It's
yeah, like,
glass
in
sliding
this-
doors
Yeah.
in the garage, so you can
So you
close it.
don't, I mean, but you'd be like, it would be hard.
Correct.
to be in
It
there.
would, with the cages that are in there now, you would be touching wall to cage to shut the door behind you. So when we clean, it's open, but the cats remain inside. And then if you were to remove the cages, you would only be able to quarantine one cat at a time. And they would have limited floor space, but I mean, you could put cat trees and you would be able to utilize the space in the air, but other than that, the room has not been very functional.
You don't have double-sided housing in there either, right?
Correct.
So when you're quarantining a cat, you're really not supposed to come in contact with it, and you're having to try to clean around it while it's not escaping into the sally port.
Correct.
That gives me a heart attack, because that Sally Porter can hide anywhere realistically. So I've tried to clean with the door shut behind me, but like I said, like you're
It
literally
can be hard.
smashed up against the cage. Yeah, I do agree that did miss the mark there.
I didn't even know you guys could use it because the last thing that I heard was something about a vent having to be fixed. So I was
Yeah.
worried that it still wasn't fixed,
They
but
did fix
I didn't realize, like, honestly how small.
Yeah, no, they did fix the vent and we have used it maybe a handful of times since the vent was fixed. But essentially, to be honest, we have used the prior quarantine room for any sort of quarantine we've done because it's more efficient. There are more cages, we can isolate them properly. And then when we're not using quarantine, we're using that for any sort of cat intake, stray, hold as well.
Is there a better use for that room?
I would say it's better used as quarantine aside from when we're at max capacity and then we would need it for cats that aren't being quarantined. But the problem that was brought up about the one cage that is in the hallway, there's nowhere else for that one to go. So the two rooms that we do have the max amount of cage space in them that they can have. The cage is basically line one wall and then the only space left you have is to walk in. So we would have, there would be else to put the other cages.
So it used to be in that spot where that quarantine room is, that's where they used to be stored in the past, but there's not really any room to work with at this point.
I know Sarah had discussed it, and she had mentioned there had been previous discussions about, extending the building, past our long hallway that goes out to the green space area. And her concern, well, she's not here, I still honor and really appreciate all of her thoughts and her concerns that she had shared. Her concern with that was just that it, was well protected or most protected from the elements in that area. And she was concerned if it was moved to another area, it might not be the animals wouldn't be as protected from the elements when they're outside.
I think the fix for that are the tarps.
Solar phase,
Yeah. Yeah, I think we can fix that. That's a low hanging fruit.
So we're talking about extending on the side that has the cats in the adoption. Or the sides that have the runs on it that kind of has a little bit of an overhang.
Down the main hallway from the lobby.
So kind of on the cat side, would she also maybe be talking about elements like the wall that's blocking the dogs from the busy street? Would she also be talking about that? Because if we added essentially another room size, that would put it to the end where we have our exit. And then if the dog yard went beyond that, we would be at the exit, or if we kept it to the left of the additional. Then, I mean, then the street wouldn't be a problem because it'd be on the back side of another room.
Right.
And we could extend that wall. Because if you're taking that drive anyway, you're going to need to block it,
Yeah, so we would be creating a new drive.
not
We have to work with an architect to see.
Yeah,
which one it
because-
is. We couldn't lose all of our staff parking either. There's
Right.
a little tiny.
The
which
parking in
We
the
could talk
front
about that too.
and
We don't
Valley View
Really bad parking.
and then the clinic, and the drive was behind it, kind of comes around, honestly.
Yeah.
And it was this side back here, that he was talking, because that's floodplain. Okay, so if you shifted the dog runs and things into the floodplain, you can't build in that.
Right.
You have to build over here. And so you're going to essentially have to block this. And what does that look like? Is it coming out with the building over here and the building is blocking it? Or are you, taking this wall that was on that backside and extending it over? So, I mean, they're not next to the road anyway at that point, but if you guys are parking right here and you've used that now has become small parking for employees, then you still have to pretty much just block that drive. If that makes any sense at all with my chicken scratch little,
Then where would they go? I'm just curious, because.
what do you mean?
Where
Because
would they
that-
park?
Well, that's what I'm saying. They'd still have this parking over here and they could feasibly still have this parking right here. So, but that's an architect. That was just kind of a rough, this was what Ben was talking about, that floodplain. That we could do the dog runs in, but we can't build into it because it's a floodplain. So the expansion has to go this direction.
Well, at least you're not doing a whole revamp and a second floor.
Exactly.
It's definitely something we can explore and just making
Yeah.
sure I know Sarah really wanted to stress, but while she's not here, I wanted to share at least her wishes that she really wanted to stress the importance of understanding expansion may also need staff expansion too, so.
Yes,
Taking
absolutely.
away parking spots and taking away, we want to make sure that we're making a wise decision both in space and staff capacity too.
Yeah.
And with
Well,
these apartments coming, I mean, that's something to think of in the future.
Yeah, especially with the ones that are coming, whatever direction we are down there.
By the Galleria.
You might consider something like a comprehensive needs assessment that views not only your building need, but your city's needs overall for programs. So you would be able to understand through a needs assessment, like what are the current practices in animal welfare and what are the best ways to house and what space do you need for that? And, like if you want them to look 15 years in the future based on the population, then that's probably advised if you're not looking to do something brand new within that amount of time. And then also what programs will support that. So that probably means the staff, like what you're saying. So you need to have enough staff to keep the areas that you're given in really good condition and safe and healthy conditions. Because if there aren't enough staff, then you have disease outbreaks and then it's bad for the animals, but it also takes so much more time because you're medicating every animal you have all the time. And then you also, like, in terms of programs, like making sure that your vet care is, basically like happening in a good amount of time, so you guys aren't bottlenecking with animals that could go up for adoption. Having probably something related to foster care and volunteers, so that you have somebody who can help with that. And then even up to like considering behavior enrichment, because the animals that we're getting into the shelters they're not just the easy animals anymore. Like with sterilization has come like great lengths in like reducing the overall population from when even the 2000s, but now we're getting animals that they need more things. They need X behavior modification to be able to go back into the community safely. And so we're seeing a lot of those things in the shelter. And so if you had a needs assessment, it might be able to look at that broad overview of like where you're at, where you want to be / where you should be. And that could be helpful before
moving forward on it.
Yeah, and monetarily wise too, because a needs assessment is gonna be really cost effective compared to taking like a stab in the dark and like
Right.
buying something that you probably.
Do you know, have you utilized that before? Do you have an approximate cost on that?
I would say that our needs assessment, I don't wanna misspeak, but I think it was like under $10,000. There's different groups that do them and we got bids for them, so I could like find the exact amount, but we did ours in 2015 in preparation for a 2019 build. So, but there are shelters that do them all the time just to like check, like do a pulse check of where they're at and see like what their, 1-year plan is, 3 years, 5 years, that kind of thing.
That's great.
That is.
I really like this. Yeah, I think it would definitely help us on the backside of Sarah leaving and the employees that are still here kind of having to pick up the slack, especially what she's referring to as programs like fostering, volunteering, trying to utilize the employee for a specific thing, because a lot of us do all of those things at once already. So
It's too much.
it would be very helpful to us to see if extra positions would be necessary to benefit the shelter.
And to be on that kind of, not necessarily cutting edge, but to be up to date with.
Yeah,
with
and I
what's
think,
going
yeah, a
on
lot of
and-
places already have specific staff for those specific things. Like I know does Tri-City have that?
So yeah, every other shelter I've worked at, they've had a foster volunteer coordinator, an offsite coordinator that also handled social media. And I feel like here we're expected to kind of do a bit of all of it. We don't have any kind of structure going on. I think going forward, it would also help with us not being crammed into a corner to have a better foster program. That way we're not, being forced to have people surrender their pets for euthanasia because we don't have any space. I really think it would be very beneficial to get the volunteer and foster program just way more structured, but that is actually a lot of work to get off the ground to run
It
efficiently.
takes time for regular employees to try and compose it by themselves and operate it.
It is a lot because not only do you have to have the program structured, so I've run a foster care program that had about 200 foster care homes, and it's a lot because you're their one person that they come to, and they have all your animals. So it's like you're not cleaning and caring for them every day, but they still need you for those things.
Yeah.
And depending on how many animals you have in foster care and your program size, I mean, I could see in Farmers Branch that it might fall on a volunteer coordinator to be able to like have the volunteers in the foster homes, and then their forces are multiplied by the volunteers, just because it's not something like Dallas where you have like 3 volunteer coordinators and a foster coordinator. We don't have 30,000 animals a year. So it could be something like that, but the fact of having a staff person who's designated for that multiplies their force by many by being able to have it more coordinated in a volunteer aspect. And I have a feeling that there's a high number of residents that want to do that. Just if it was, maybe like if it was structured.
Structured program,
Yeah. Because the worst thing that can happen is like they do it once and then it's kind of like, sort of just like not coordinated and they don't feel supported and then they get scared and then they don't.
That's what it already is. We have a decent amount of people that reach out wanting to do fostering and volunteer things for us, but because it lacks structure and all the employees kind of have to take it upon themselves to coordinate it, we fall through. Like someone helps out once and then there could be animals that need a little more experience that fosters are just reaching out and we might not feel comfortable utilizing them, but if we had a coordinator, we could be training them, assisting them better. So we have people that reach out and want to, but it's hard to utilize them and do our jobs at the
Do
same
you have
time.
enough offices for people? I mean, Yes.
So we have an office that houses the officers. The assistants work up front.
Yeah, there was a picture.
The assistants work up front at 2 different monitors, and there's one office for the officers that they share, and then the manager's office.
Right, but, yeah, and I saw that, but I was just wondering, like, if we added more people or.
If we added more people, especially on terms of like a volunteer foster coordinator, I mean, yes, it would be nice for them to have their own space, and we don't have a room for that now.
We have 2 extra desks though that
Yeah.
aren't being utilized right now. We just need to work on getting them monitored and PCs.
Yeah, I think we already have an officer right now that we might have started this discussion with finances, yes, about giving them a monitor. So then we have extra desks, just no setup, because right now we don't have staff that needs them.
Okay, let's go back to this social media that was very likely touched on, and you guys feel like you're expected to do that as well. And because you're doing so many other things, that's not a priority. Is that something that if we could find a place for that, that would just take like a little bit off of you
I
guys?
would
That
say
would be,
it's really on the back burner right now. In
okay,
2
so that's a
years.
problem. Because we
Yeah.
can't build a volunteer foster program if we aren't consistently in front of.
If you don't have the media.
Yeah,
Right.
definitely. in
Can
the
we
2
work with
years-
Jeff on that maybe? Okay,
Yeah, the 2 years that I've worked there, we haven't really used it to the max capacity because it is literally whoever has something or time to put on there can use it.
Who's Jeff?
Brady.
He's our communications.
Yeah.
Our prior director did mention that, maybe communication staff can step in and just get to know an animal a bit and at least focus on posting specific animals, because you're not gonna get engagement if you're only posting like once a week or once a month. And the last post that was made to our Facebook was in December, so I know that's like a very optimal way to get animals adopted.
It is, but that's gonna require you guys to communicate very clearly and concisely with them.
Mhm.
And they were doing that at the dog park. It wasn't like once a week.
So that's the thing, we don't necessarily have the staff to continue something like that. You would be taking a staff member off of the field or out of the shelter to go to the dog park, do a video for however long it takes, and or just communicating with Jeff, because I know they put him in the newsletter too, like a dog of the week kind of thing. Yeah, so
And it was
Those
only on
things are
Mondays that could happen
When the
because
park was
park-
closed.
Yeah, the park was closed, but Mondays we're running basically a skeleton crew. It's just running field calls. The shelter is closed, so that helps a lot, but some Mondays can be insanity. So sometimes you'd be too tied up to even go to the dog park. It kind of fall through, even though that was the expectation there, but we're just not adequately staffed enough.
I attempted it anyway.
I would also say that, just coming from a person who wears a lot of hats, the website too. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with your website, but if there's no one able to update the social media, there's a good chance that the website's not getting updated. The adoptable pets will, because it's being fed through Pet Point. But some of the other things that might be able to be posted there probably aren't. I'm kind of behind on mine too.
yeah, and FAQ, I know we have a tab for that. I've gone through it recently after Sarah leaving, just to touch on like what it says about fostering, because we've taken it upon ourselves to pause that. So to be entirely honest, fostering and volunteering is on hold until we do have a proper manager in the building. So like our website still says like, we are wanting this, we are accepting this. So stuff like that to be updated frequently and what's currently going on. So the foster program, stuff with the TNR program. We have a lot of residents that see the issues with the TNR program and the feral cats outside, and they want to be able to utilize our TNR program, but that's solely dependent on surgery. Now that we do surgery through OPK, they feed us the days that they're available, which is not as consistent as it used to be. We used to have surgery once a week. Now we've experienced some backlash with residents because we're not able to provide surgery once a week anymore. So there's a lot of communication that has to go on between the staff and residents on making sure they're on the same page. Hey, you can't trap this week because we don't have surgery, so you can't bring an animal in to sit here for 14 days until the next appointment. So something like the website could be used to express to residents, that that's on hold, or it's available this week, it's not available. That's another issue.
Do you guys have, so you have Facebook?
Facebook, Instagram, and our
Twitter?
website. I don't know what Twitter is.
You have Nextdoor?
Jeff Brady, our communications
Okay.
does.
Okay.
Absolutely. In our hopes in finding our new shelter managers, seeing some of our areas that we're weaker and seeing areas that we need to excel in. I know that as we're looking to hire this person, we have some areas that we need some streamlined programs, we need some efficiency, we need some clear communication on some of these things. But I really like the idea too of the comprehensive needs assessment, so it's an outside party of professionals, it's not one person wearing many hats, spinning all of the plates all of the time, but having that outside party coming in is a good idea. I really like that.
They have good ideas because they see a multitude of operations and how all those things come together.
Yes.
They're generically alike, but everyone has has a different need in the community.
Yeah, what understanding, do they adjust for size comparison of, you know, a town of 40,000
Yeah.
compared to Dallas, we're not going to have the same types of. I like that.
Because when we first opened this shelter, the current one, in 2009, we had a lady named Judy Hacker that did all the foster care, and ran the program because she had her own foster program. And then Jerry Pendry was the veterinarian that would come in and volunteer his time to do spays and neuters. So it would be great if we could have some local veterinarians that might get some publicity by, when we're in a crunch, to come in and do a spay or neuter.
It would be helpful to have them on weeks that we don't have surgery. The only thing is like, in the past, talking about shelter updates, there was talk regarding the surgery room. It's very small, condensed.
It is.
Not a lot to have more than one vet working. On occasion, we do have like new vets that offer their services for free, and we have them working in the hallway. So we do get people that want to offer out to help. And then if we were to try and amp up the surgery to multiple times a week, that would kind of not be as helpful because of the way that it takes space for
We don't
all
have
of
the room.
yeah, all of the texts that come from Operation Kindness. Like, I believe we are coming to tour the shelter after this, and it is a surgery day. So y'all are all gonna see how that takes up space. But the animals that are waiting for surgery, there's not a waiting area. So they're in our hallway. They're obviously in cages and stuff like that, but to have maybe additional vets to assist with the amount of animals that we need to be done, or on weeks that we don't have it, it would still need to be limited to a specific day because of the amount of tasks that it gives to the employees, because though we have the vet, the employees still have to be doing their normal job up front, answering phones, helping people that come in, but we also have to do all of the medical paperwork and prepare the animals to be sent home. So we wouldn't necessarily be able to do it multiple days a week, but having it consistently every week would be helpful so that we don't have to turn down stuff like the TNR program.
So there's another need.
Was your vet space, it wasn't designed to be the vet?
I think it was just a storage closet.
Okay.
That's what
I think the place to start is with the assessment needs.
Yeah, definitely.
We've almost doubled our population recently. And like you say, right across the street, there's a 6-story going up. London Square is gonna be demolished, another 6 stories going up. The infrastructure in Farmers Branch is struggling to keep up with all this growth. And I consider the shelter to be infrastructure. So we loved our new shelter. It was compared to what we had. It was
Oh, yeah.
a Taj
Oh, yeah,
Mahal.
I've toured it.
Yeah. So I'd like to see the shelter gain more importance on the council's
Yes.
agenda.
I hear you.
I would venture.
Every time the chairs get together, I mention it almost every time.
And then you'll have to roll off, and then we get new people, and it disappears.
Yeah.
I won't be gone.
Oh, good. So I just want to have that in our notes that,
Yeah, we could sit here and keep coming up with things. I think the cap is that the assessment would just cover all of that. That's something.
plan for
Yeah, so if you can, assessments need, number one, Jeff for some CPR, because that will also help with donations. That'll go a long way for donations. And if not Jeff, then if we could tap into the phenomenal person that the police and fire are sharing. Yes, I said it on camera.
If Jeff could focus on it once a month, because I know he does a weekly for, items that he talks about. But if he could,
But maybe one of his,
yeah, something, one could be about donations, one could be about, let's foster some of these dogs, one could be, input as to what our needs are.
I think the only thing with bringing Jeff into it is that we would need to have our ducks in a line before he reaches out and we have this uproar of people wanting to help. So like what we're saying with the volunteering and fostering, we're not structured yet. So if we outreach asking for that,
Well, it's
how do we combat?
But if he's
this down the
saying,
road?
okay, we know you need beds. You need to update your beds.
Yeah.
He can talk about that.
Definitely.
And this is where you go to order those and have them sent to us. Thank you very much. Done.
Right.
The feel good story, Nico, and why it's important that you chip.
Yeah.
That's, story number 2. So you're already a couple of stories or weeks ahead, just start making notes. Ben is amazing with this. He starts on Mondays with his council email, and all week long, he just updates it until Friday afternoon, and he just hits the send, or she does, or someone does. I don't know who. I don't care who. It just happens. And so if you guys just write it down, put it on a sticky note in a certain area. Just grab the sticky notes off the board on Friday or whatever and kind of flip through and go, okay, this is the one, and send it over to them.
Well, Christina, your input has been valuable.
Invaluable. We appreciate you.
I'm slightly addicted to construction. Maybe not even just construction, but like bettering programs and like venturing out, and I never stop.
That's good.
it's wonderful to have somebody like you on our animal shelter advisory committee. Because you provide that sound advice from another municipal shelter, understanding that there are different needs with the municipal shelter than others.
Do you guys have a whiteboard anywhere?
Yes.
Write it on the whiteboard. So at the end of the week, just take a picture of it and send it to Jeff.
We can definitely create some of those processes. In the meantime, our hopes are to get a shelter manager within the next.
Tomorrow.
So it would be doing the needs assessment. How would that be done?
And find
All
out.
that I've known have been typically outside vendors, and I believe they're probably the
Yes,
same.
so they're typically going to be, municipal type organizations, like municipal serving type organizations, or specifically shelter architects, like animal shelter and animal hospital type architects that provide that service. There's a couple here in Texas. SGR is one of them that I've seen do for Garland. Quorum, Shelter Planners of America. And then I was gonna tell you afterwards, but I have to figure out the one that's out of Florida. I can't remember what it's called. And then also sometimes the veterinary teaching hospitals have that. There's a few that have notable shelter medicine programs. One of them is UC, the Coret Shelter Program at UC Davis in California. I think it's the University of Florida that has a shelter medicine program. They go under Maddie's Fund is what they're called. And then, it's in Wisconsin. There's one in Wisconsin, that has a shelter medicine program. And so a lot of times they have that type of resources like housing programs, staffing, and they do assessment in that manner. They're shelter vet, they're like shelter veterinarians.
So I written down 4. Yes,
I just can't think of the one that's the other one that was in Florida, but some of the shelter medicine programs do it too.
Becky, I need to apologize. I only allowed an hour for this meeting because I didn't.
We are,
Oh,
And so I've
Yes.
got a business meeting I have to get back to. How much time in the future should I calendar for this?
well, we won't be talking about expansion every time. Probably an hour and 15 minutes. I don't know what your drive time looks like, but yeah, we do tend to run over sometimes when we are
And that's fine, just so I
brainstorming.
know what to make allowance for.
Yeah, and I appreciate you being able to get here.
Thank you.
So,
You get passionate about what we talk about and go a little. That's good.
and you have my contact information too, so I know you said you're typically off on Mondays, but if you ever want to tour the shelter on a different day, I'm happy to help you out and meet you there too.
That would be great. Thank you.
we'll see you in June. Yeah, everybody got the email with the dates for this year, for the dates. Okay. Well, there's no further discussion. This was very productive.
Is anyone joining us?
Pardon?
Anybody joining us at the shelter after? You've got to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the rest of us kind of know it already, so. So we don't need a motion to adjourn, but I will adjourn the meeting at 1:14. Thank you, everybody.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.